Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for tuning in for this third Wednesday Parent Resource Chat on April the 17th. As most of you know, my name is Thomas Robertson. Everybody just calls me Duke. I am the Technology and Metrics Director for Oak Hill Regional CDC, which is the parent corporation of Healthy Kids Mississippi. I will be the moderator today. We also have with us this morning um, Mrs. Lauderminer, there is project director for Oak Hill Regional CDC. We recognize our board chair, Jennifer Garrett, and our executive director, Dr. Michael O'Miner. In addition to the Zoomcast, we are restreaming today's webinar on our Oak Hill Regional CDC and Healthy Kids Mississippi Facebook page. We are also streaming live on our app, Oak Hill RCDC app. But please feel free to share on your social media pages. Health awareness events that are of note in the month of April include Minority Health Month, Alcohol Awareness Month, and World Health Day was April 7th. Whereas these are important topics and very deserving of our time and attention. Today we have chosen to highlight National Autism Acceptance Month. But before we start our presentation, I again encourage you to please share this webinar on your social media platforms. Then make sure you have your pencil and paper ready to write down your questions, concerns, as I will be sure to save time for answering any questions you have about the presentation. Um, our our guest speaker for today is no stranger to us. We have had the pleasure of having him provide us with information on a variety of mental health and medical concerns. However, for those of you who are joining us today for the first time, I will share just a little bit about his background. Dr. Don Vereen Jr. is currently the director for the University of Michigan Substance Abuse Research Center. He is a public health psychiatrist who directs community based research activities and public health research in such areas as drug abuse, addiction, mental health, violence, and HIV and AIDS at the University of Michigan School of Public Health. He was born right here in the great state of Mississippi, city of Biloxi, Mississippi. Traveled the world as an Air Force brat, earned an AB degree from Harvard College and MD from Tufts University School of Medicine and an MPH from Harvard School of Public Health. After completing fellowships at Johns Hopkins and Harvard Medical School, Dr. Vereen developed new collaborative research programs at the National Institutes of Health as a medical officer and a special assistant to the directors of NIMH and NIDA. This work included providing research-based health and policy advice to federal and state judges and two mayors of Washington, D.C. From 1998 to 2002, he served as the deputy drug czar under Presidents Clinton and Bush, where he oversaw community-based prevention efforts, the National Youth Anti-Drug Media Campaign, the introduction of new drug treatment approaches, and the U.S. efforts to establish the World Anti-Doping Agency. He returned to NIH to oversee efforts to bring the power of research to bear on such areas as child abuse and neglect, health disparities, and develop new clinical research strategies. I'll now turn it over to Dr. Vereen to fill us in about our topic on today. Dr. Vereen, you can take over. Oh, you're muted, Dr. Vereen.
How's that? It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. Um, and I am going to share some information this morning about autism. And it's the topic that you are interested in learning more about. And what I'm hoping to do this morning is to spend maybe 15 or 20 minutes. If there are questions as I go along or comments that you'd like to make as I go along, I will pay attention to what's in the chat if you have access to that. Um, Otherwise, I will try to provide as much time as possible so that we can interact, because I don't want to just flood you with all kinds of information. So with that, I do have some visuals. You may in fact use the visuals. They will be available. I can make them available as a reference to anyone who would like the slides. They're full of lots of words and things, which I tend not to uh, try to do. I prefer to use visuals and pictures if I'm going to be talking about something. But there is a lot of information there, and you can use the slides for your own purposes. So I'm going to share the screen here. And are you still seeing me, or are you seeing any of the slides?
We see the full PowerPoint. If you want to bring the start from the slide one.
Oh, you do. Okay. Yeah, I'm not. Oh, there it is. Sorry, I wasn't getting the right feedback. There we go. So that's me. Mr. Robertson already introduced me well enough, and thank you for that introduction. Okay, before jumping in and talking about autism, which is a spectrum disorder, I want to place autism and what it is in a much broader and an important context. And that is, autism is one of a number of childhood, what are referred to as childhood development disorders. And what I'm going to do is walk through what some of these developmental disorders are so you can appreciate where autism falls into this. So technically, the childhood development disorders are considered psychiatric disorders in the sense that something is wrong, or something is off of the main line when it comes to behaviors, thinking, feeling, and how people go about living their lives. I first want to mention that there are different ways that these developmental disorders can happen. Fetal alcohol syndrome, which you can see on this slide, is one example of a childhood developmental disorder because the fetus is exposed to alcohol. The alcohol has an effect on the formation of the brain and other organs and parts of the developing child's body. And as that child develops, different things become clear that are a result of the effect of the exposure to alcohol. All of the developmental disorders involve some kind of introduction of a process to that developing fetus. And sometimes you can have developmental disorders that actually start after a baby is born. And I'll sort of talk about this at the end when I try to wrap up. Mental illnesses, for the most part, are considered developmental disorders. All of the mental illnesses we tend to see they tend to crop up in late adolescence. And that makes it a developmental issue. There's some things going on in the formation and the settling of the brain. And when those changes don't quite go right, that's when you get these disorders. So in some cases, you can be exposed to something like alcohol. Sometimes other drugs can cause issues. There are other developmental disorders that you may be familiar with. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, or ADD. With this particular disorder, people have trouble paying attention or focusing on, for example, their schoolwork, or they can't sit still. Again, there's some change or issue in the brain, and what you get is this pattern of behavior where attention, focusing, and hyperactivity live together. Then there are a set of learning disorders. So often, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is thought to be a learning disorder. Technically, it's not. It's a disorder that if you can't sit still in school and you can't pay attention in school, you're not going to learn. But it turns out that people with ADHD can certainly learn. In fact, they have a higher than normal IQ compared to other kids when you measure that using tests. With the learning disorders, when you're in the classroom, it's hard to learn to read. It's hard to learn to write, is another form of a learning disorder. And then there's also the specific issue of having trouble learning to do math. And you'll see here that I've listed dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia. So that's a challenge when it comes to reading, a challenge when it comes to writing, and a challenge when it comes to doing math and figuring out mathematical concepts. I put Whoopi Goldberg up here because there are lots of people out there who have a childhood developmental disorder. She happens to have and is open about admitting and describing and talking about how she has overcome dyslexia. I have a daughter who is severely dyslexic. And so these are things that you can see, but it doesn't necessarily hinder people from being able to go out and achieve. That's certainly true with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. People with fetal alcohol syndrome, do have a way to be able to reach certain potentials. And I'll get in just a second to the autism spectrum disorders, where sometimes you could be sitting next to someone, know them your whole life, and not know that they're quote unquote on the spectrum. So the last area I wanted to mention that is a big important category in childhood development disorders are language disorders. We know of many children who sometimes have a delayed speech. They may be 4, 5, 6 before they are able to use their words, either single words at a time or putting them together in a sentence. People who have a quote unquote stutter or stammer, that's again a brain-based issue that can be diagnosed and then worked upon. And then there are the autism spectrum disorders. And you can see that there's a big family of these issues, and autism is one of these. So I put here in boring writing that autism has a medical clinical diagnosis. I'm going to describe it not using the technical terms that are used in this statistical manual, but I do want to point out that there are two main categories of issues with people who have autism in the wide range that they occur. One of the main issues is a problem or a challenge of communicating in social situations and interacting with other people. Now, some of you, hopefully will say, well, that's an art. Some of us are shy. Some of us get along with people. Some of us, as there's a term, can work a room. Many of our politicians are like that. But that can be a challenge for some people. And so that's one of the main issues. And the other is that there can be a very narrow range of behaviors, of interests, and things that people with autism like to do. And that's one of the things that helps them to stand out. They may only be focused on books. They may only like to go to the library. And there are a host of behaviors that are associated with folks who were on the spectrum. Now, if you were like me, I was a bit of a nerd. I also played sports, but I liked going to the library, and I could spend hours at a time there. And so I say that to say that what a person with autism experiences can in fact be in the realm of normal. There are some of us who are shy and don't like interacting with people, but we don't necessarily have autism. When we get depressed, for example, and you earn the diagnosis of depression, you can be isolated and develop repetitive behaviors, be anxious, and you're not autistic, but you can look like someone who has autism. And that's one of the difficult things about coming up with the label and earning the diagnosis, so to speak, because so many of these behaviors and issues overlap with what happens with quote unquote normal behavior. So with autism, it's often diagnosed, most of the time, it's diagnosed in early childhood. And what brings a person with autism to our attention, in general, the babies tend not to develop at what I'll call the average rate of development. People will note that, a baby at 3 months doesn't smile. I think there's something genetic about babies, evolutionarily, because, babies are a lot of work. They're born, they're totally dependent on mother and family to take care of them and feed them. And by the time 3 months comes along, you're at your wit's end taking care of the baby, and then the baby learns to smile. And any of you that have interacted with babies know that there is nothing like, it is so infectious to have that baby smile back at you. And that's a milestone for development. Babies learn to smile, or incorporate that into their repertoire of behaviors. They babble, they make sounds, they hear sounds, and they understand that they can actually create the things that they're learning to hear and to identify through hearing. They recognize who mother and father are, and they know who strangers are. They know who is not mother and father. That's what they're starting to learn at that point. Move ahead to a year or more, and the baby's psychomotor system develops, and they can crawl. They can, stand. Some overly controlling parents will say this is when they start to get into trouble because they move around. They don't want to pay attention to no, you can't do that kind of thing. And the first words will start, around that 1 year period. And then there are other developmental things that happen with children who have a spectrum disorder, who have an autistic spectrum problem. They're not going to hit these milestones. They're going to be slower hitting the milestones. It isn't that they're going to miss all of the milestones, but there are some milestones, and it depends on the particular baby. They'll miss a milestone or two, and there'll be a pattern that will develop depending on which milestone has not been reached. So the way that I'm offering, and I think I got this from the CDC, notice how many words there are there to describe this. It isn't just a 1 word or a 5-word definition of the problem. It's not like diabetes, where you have elevated sugar, and that can be for lots of different reasons, but you have an elevated sugar level in your system. With autism, it's a developmental, and they use the word disability here because people are at a disadvantage when they have this disorder. We are thinking more and more that just because people are different doesn't mean that they're less. Just because people are different doesn't mean that they're disabled in some way because they're not necessarily fitting in with everybody. We need to be conscious of that so that we respect people, everyone. But this is still considered a disability because there are deficits, and then there are ways to help these people reach a fuller or more full potential. And so it's a developmental disability, and it's caused by differences in the brain. Now, in terms of relating to you, would add the word brain development. There are differences in the brain, but the brain is developing. Even, this old dog right here, I'm still learning things. My brain is still adjusting to the kinds of things that I do, that I'm doing at this point in my life. So people with ASD, who have autism spectrum disorder, often have problems with social communication and interaction. We saw that with the official definition that I showed earlier. And then there are these restrictive and repetitive behaviors or interests. So they may learn differently, they may move differently, they pay attention differently, but many of them, are able to negotiate the world well enough. So So what are some of the examples of what I'm talking about? If you have problems, interacting with people socially, let's break that down. There's eye contact. Normally, when you're interacting with people, whether you're arguing with them, whether you're having a conversation with them, being intimate with them, you usually have eye contact. Often, people with autism, they're not making eye contact. You'll note that very quickly and very easily. These folks tend not to show facial expressions. It's almost as if they have Parkinson's disease, at age 3 or 4, and then for the rest of their lives, their faces are static. Is a word that we use in medicine. By the age of 9 months, they're not getting the fact that they have a name, and they're not responsive to being called. We may not like our names, but we answer to our names. I happen to like my name, but when someone calls my name, hopefully it's somebody that I want to see, and yeah, oh, somebody wants me. That is missing in these folks early in life. They don't interact with people, and we know this because little kids like to play games. They're not gesturing like I am right now. People tell me that sometimes I'm part Italian, but that's I am a little nervous, and that's why I'm using my hands. You don't see that in people with autism. No shared interests. They can't point to things. All of those are things that you would do as you're interacting with people. You see something, and you want the people you're with to be able to see something. That's a social interaction, and it's missing in folks with autism. And let me say that many of these behaviors, while they're missing, they can be taught. So I'll just mention that, and then move on to a couple of others, specific things that will help nail down what this is. So when we talk about some of these restrictive, repetitive behaviors and interests, they'll repeat words and phrases over and over again when they get to the point of being able to use words. The term used is echolalia, meaning they'll just repeat what they hear as if it were an echo. They'll play with toys the same way every time. Now, if you dealt with kids, you know that kids do that. Kids who don't have autism will do that, but somehow it sticks out for young people with autism. They'll focus on pieces or parts of an object, not the whole thing. Anytime you change their routine, they're getting very, very upset. They're obsessive and very attached to the activities that they like to do and the things they like to play with. There may be unnatural movements that you'll see the kid do all the time, even though they're not stressed. So they'll flap their hands, they'll rock back and forth. I do that sometimes when I'm nervous, but for some of these folks, you'll notice it. It will stick out in a way that's a little bit beyond the normal, the so-called normal, the so-called average. They'll have other related challenges and issues. Their language is delayed. It doesn't, they're not learning to speak as fast as everybody else. They may be awkward in their movements. The way they learn is not the way many other people learn. And by the way, you will see this in the other developmental disorders as well. So I saw this chart and I thought that this might be helpful, as we're thinking about this phenomenon of autism, that there are these levels, and it may explain why I gave the example. You may be sitting next to someone who seems perfectly fine, but they've been diagnosed with autism, and they're at level 3. They're very high functioning. I'm sorry, at level 1. They're very high functioning. They've figured out how to at least not stand out too much in awkward social situations. And I'll let you read this at some other point, but there are these levels to try to separate and describe not only how severe the autism is, but what this classification will do is determine what kind of help and the intensity of help that needs to be applied to help these folks achieve their maximum achievements. The other thing that I did, I think I have 2 examples here. This is a visual, but it's a complicated visual. And autism is complicated. You'll see all of these different areas and issues. Executive functioning, how well do they plan? How do they perceive things? Are loud noises an issue for them? Are they awkward and not so smooth in their ability to move around? What is their language like? And all of those have to be put together for the individual. And then it's helpful to make a guess as to where someone is on the spectrum. And again, that's important because the interventions that you would put in place to help the person achieve all they can achieve, the most that they can achieve, that's the purpose of being able to address all of these different things. This is more detail about what a person with autism experiences. I'll come back to this if there are more specific questions and answers, but this is a more visual way of looking at this. And this was done by a particular psychology group, and shared that with you. So when it comes to helping people with autism, notice here that there are 7 different categories of intervention/treatment. So we've got a complicated phenomenon, and it makes sense that if it's complicated, then you are going to have a complicated set of choices on what to bring to bear to help that person recover best. There are behavioral, developmental, educational, social, relational, pharma. There aren't any specific pills or medicines for people with autism, but they have these co-occurring issues, and sometimes medication can be used to help them with those issues. I did mention anxiety and depression. If those get really, really bad in this vulnerable population, they would require treatment just as anyone else would benefit from treatment for those things. But it would help with their co-occurring autism set of issues. cognitive behavioral therapy seems to be a very, very good intervention for the folks that are in the middle to the higher functioning area. And there is a lot of science to try to understand what role diet may play in helping to minimize the symptoms or to enhance any of the treatments. For many of these folks, especially if there's an anxiety component, mindfulness is something that people are looking at. Mindfulness is something that we could all benefit from, but is looking like it's a very, very, very important intervention for people with one of the spectrum disorders, with autism spectrum disorders. So I think with that, I have a lot more information about the brain and what's happening when you have this moving target, this developing brain, and things not quite happening the way they're supposed to as the brain is developing. That's a difficult concept to kind of talk about, and I have some more information to help us think about that if you're interested, or if it's helpful in our discussion. So at this point, I am going to stop sharing, and I'm not sure I'm doing that right, but I think you can see me. And if there are any questions or comments, either chat or hopefully I can hear you.
All right, we have, if anyone has a question, they are more than welcome to raise their hands and we will unmute you. But we have a few questions. We have a couple of questions on social media for you, Dr. Vereen.
Okay,
Let's
sure.
see. The question is, are boys more likely to get autism? If so, why?
Yes, boys are 4 times more likely to have autism than girls. We don't know why. There isn't a definitive answer, but I can give you some things to think about. Boy brains and girl brains are different. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb. Some of you have heard me say this before. Girls are smarter than boys. Their brain development seems to be on a trajectory where their brain, including the most highly developed parts of the brain, which are, just behind your forehead, that development in girls seems to happen faster. If you watch girls and boys, I've had a girl, I've had a boy, the girls can handle social situations better. You take a group of girls at a birthday party, they'll be doing, whatever the party activity is, and it's often very orderly. The boys are running around. They're full of energy. They're not always as focused. That is a reflection. We say boys will be boys, not as an excuse, but as an observation. There are 2 different kinds of brains operating. That's why you see the differences in the behaviors in general. Now, of course, I was perfect. So, I ran around when I was supposed to run around, and I I said please and thank you right on cue when I was supposed to. But and that gives us a clue that these brains are different. The girls can do the social stuff better. They have a brain that is better wired to do the social kinds of things. And I think the disorder shows up more in boys because they the genetics are such that their brain develops a certain way. And the genetics will include the effect of testosterone and estrogen and progesterone on the development of the brain. And just so you're aware, let me underscore that point about the sex hormones having various effects. They have various effects all over the body. So lung development, for example, lung development is very, very dependent on estrogen. So when, for example, when there are premature babies, the premature girls are much more likely to survive than the premature boys. And it has to do with lung development because you need your lungs to be able to breathe. And that is a real challenge for very, very, very young babies, in particular premature babies. And the girls have better developed lungs, and it's because they're girls. It's because of the sex hormones. And it's a similar situation with the brain. Well, I won't go into the issue of how classrooms are set up at this point, but yes, that's a very good question. We do see it in boys. There are differences in boy brains and girl brains, and that would be sort of a best answer to why. Are there other aspects of that question that I could?
Well, here's another question that can tie into that. Do the symptoms look the same in boys and girls?
As far as we can tell, we have these great brain scanning technologies, and there isn't a brain test that says, oh, this scan says you have autism. We can't do that. Kids with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, at some point in their development, there are some general changes, but it's not enough to make a diagnosis. In fact, when attention deficit hyperactivity disorder was first being identified, the disease was actually called first minimal brain disorder, meaning you saw these subtle changes in the outer part of the brain. Nobody knew how to explain it. It seemed to be associated with kids who were hyperactive. And so they tried to put those things together, but otherwise we don't have a brain test. You can't see it. It's like Alzheimer's. You can't see it per se on a brain scan. You'd have to do an actual brain biopsy, and that's unethical. Actually, you can't go into a live person and take out a piece of their brain. So I hope that answers the question.
Yes, yes.
Mhm.
And we'll have, if anyone else has any questions, you're more than welcome to raise your hand. We see we have one hand raised. Let's unmute, allow them to speak. Ms. Hill, can you hear us? Are you able to speak?
How you all doing this morning? Good morning. Okay. My name is Apple Hill. I
Good
know you're talking
morning.
about autism and mental illness. But over in my county, about 3 weeks ago, the person was mental ill. But I'm still trying to define that because he killed three people. He killed his
Mhm.
grandfather, his mother, his grandmother, and another lady. He killed all three of them. And he had go in and got a gun twice, and they said they taken that one away from him, but he got a chance to get another one. I just been kind of on my mind, kind of wondering about that. What is really mental illness, and they was taking care of him, but he was in a mental institution, and they are went and got him to take care of him.
Okay. So, 2 points. The first
Hmm.
is that there can be a big overlap between
Okay.
people in people who have autism
Hmm.
and other psychiatric issues. So that's the first thing. There can be a huge overlap.
Okay.
And I put up all those slides with the words on them to uh, try to tease out all these different symptoms, because if you can get a list of those and they're consistent, and then you can see how some of them will go away when you intervene appropriately, um, eh, that helps to make the diagnosis that, yeah, there's autism involved and you're dealing with that part of the autism. But if you have these other psychiatric issues, if there's depression, anxiety, if they're psychotic, and I'm going to underscore that in just a second, then you're going to treat those
Both. Okay.
with other interventions that we know work for those diagnoses or those parts that overlap.
Okay.
Now, when someone murders,
Mhm.
you by definition, there is a mental illness,
Listen,
and especially if you kill family members.
family. Okay.
And what we do in the profession, one of the first things we want to know is, were they able to, function within reality? Were they psychotic? Were they responding to issues that were not um, based in the real world? Um, if they were hearing voices in particular,
Okay.
telling them to do things, even things that they didn't want to do, uh, that usually puts you into the realm of schizophrenia. You can have command hallucinations in people who are manic. Sometimes these are precipitated if you take drugs of abuse. There are all these things that can impact the brain and make you behave badly.
Yeah.
Our criminal justice system doesn't go there first.
Well, okay.
They'll go there after they determine that the person did this bad thing.
Bad thing.
And then they have a punishment that goes along with that. Then they talk about, well, they have this mental illness, and we might be able to use that to make the punishment less. But when you hear something as intense as killing family members, you
Yes.
think of more extreme psychiatric issues, psychotic disorders first, and then you work back.
Okay. Well, thank you, doctor. It kind of helped me a little bit to understand that. 'Cause one of them was my friend I went to school with, and the other two, and the other lady he didn't know, but he knew his grandparents, So it was a friend of
Hmm.
his grandmother that went to kill. And they
Yeah.
say he went
Now
to kill
keep
the other grandmother, but she just wouldn't open the door for him, let him in the house. Yeah.
I see.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed your program. I'm just, I appreciate it. Thank you
Mhm.
for taking my question.
Sure thing. My pleasure. The other thing, when I started out, I was talking about childhood development disorders. Remember, our brain continues to develop. It's quote unquote fully formed by the time we're between 27, 28, 29, 30. Women may finalize things a little earlier, but there is still brain development going on. We know that because we can continue to learn things. And for some people, psychiatric issues can manifest themselves if there is a brain change. We change our brains when we use drugs, when we drink too much alcohol, when we get hit on the head, when we get hit on the head metaphorically. So let's say you went to war. Let's say you witnessed someone shooting someone and you have PTSD. Those things change your brain. And so there's a recovery period after that. They do have an effect on your brain. If you're a boxer, a football player, that constant hitting of your head changes your brain. We remember Muhammad Ali. The trauma caused changes in the more primitive part of his brain, and he developed the Parkinson's and the slowed speech and the face that didn't change. All those are based on what happened when his brain was changed by those past events. And sometimes the change in the brain can be quote unquote psychological. You see something bad, it haunts you, and it's a real challenge to continue on. And if you can imagine, if you're someone with autism, you're already vulnerable. And then if these other things happen to you, it just in some ways just sets you back even further. So that's the way to think about these things. The brain is always there, always functioning, always trying to do things better. And things can get in the way of it being able to function the way it wants to.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vereen, for your presentation today. It was such an amazing, informative presentation. We have more questions, but we'll end our live stream on social media and just allow the Zoom participants to ask their questions after, if you have a few minutes after we end our
Yes,
live stream.
yes, yep.
All right.
I have plenty of.
Couple of reminders for everyone. Our next third Wednesday parent resource chat will be May 15th, 2024 at 11 a.m. We'll be talking about stroke. So please join us and encourage friends and family members to listen also, because you don't want to miss this important information. Our next Ag Mary and Pat Zoom webinar is Monday, April 29th at 6 p.m. We'll be live on our app and as well as Facebook. So again, the dates are April 29th, the Ag Mary and Pat show at 6 p.m. and May 15th at 11 a.m., the next third Wednesday parent resource chat. You may learn more about us at www.oakhillregionalcdc.com and www.healthykidsms.org. Once again, we acknowledge our board chair, Jennifer Garrett, and our executive director, Dr. Michael O'Miner. This has been a production of Oak Hill Regional Community Development Corporation, belonging, building, and bridging in the Mid-South region and across the state of Mississippi. This concludes our live stream portion of the webinar, and the ones who are on Zoom, please stick around and ask any remaining questions that you may have for Dr. Vereen. Everyone else have a great and amazing rest of your day and week.